You're tuning into Ready, Set, Reset, where our goal is to help listeners reset their outlook by providing a closer look into behavioral and mental health in our youth. We visit with a range of professionals across the field to get their input and insight on what's really going on. Our first series kicks off with the Student Mental Health Chronicles, which features school counselors from across Texas, from public to private. This podcast is for educational and motivational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional training or personal therapy. Hello, and welcome to the Ready, Set, Reset podcast. I'm your host, Sierra O'Neill, licensed professional counselor and founder of Reset IOP. With me is my co-host, Mrs. Penny Haight, licensed professional counselor supervisor and owner of Counseling by Penny and Associates. You are tuning in to an episode of our inspiring podcast that spotlights school counselors and the incredible work they do day in and day out with students. The content you will hear on this podcast today is focused on the struggles in the schools related to the mental health of youth, providing weekly insight, resources, and solutions to address growing and ongoing issues that will support other school counselors, other therapists, parents, teachers, and students across the board. Our guest today is Dr. Lisa A. Wines, PhD, LPC-S, CSC, here with us today from L&A Professional Services and professor at Prairie View A&M University. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Today is an exciting day. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you. We appreciate you taking out time in your day to sit down and talk to us a little bit more, especially as a fellow LPC in the field and the work that you do with, your clients as well as students and other professionals as well. So if you don't mind, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your experience overall as a clinician.
Sure. Well, I've been in private practice, started L&A Professional Services in 2014. Started the clinical side as a private practice in 2018 and have been working with the community. And as you might know, students from schools show up on my doorstep. My business is in the Woodlands. And so the company has grown and expanded from the original thought, which was to have a private practice, and has moved into working with interns, graduate level, who are aspiring counselors in schools and clinical mental health, along with family, marriage, couple programs, and they are interested in earning hours. And so I started working with interns, and the practice is largely designed around their support and their contributions to the practice. It's a win-win relationship. They are able to accrue their hours and meet the demands of their university, and I am able to train them with everything that I have, really leaving no stone unturned. So that's a part of the practice. I've just launched recently a division of the practice where I'll be providing counseling courses by which the university hasn't necessarily taught counselors, both in clinical mental health and in schools. I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor, so I am able to host supervision sessions in the state of Texas, but that's largely what the business is designed to do, is to grow counselors. Even with my current book publications for school counselors specifically, it helps them to become better professionals in their craft and in their field of work.
Okay. And that sounds like amazing work that you've done within your time in the field. And, as you're targeting and working with, in the school with the school counselors, have you ever been a school counselor or worked in the schools yourself at all?
Yes, I completed 10 years in school counseling. I started off in the elementary schools in Alief ISD, and I left Alief and then went to Cy-Fair ISD for the rest of my time. And I served as a school counselor and a lead counselor and gained a lot of knowledge, which helps inform the books that have been published. I would want to say that it's not so much the doctorate degree and having pursued the PhD at Sam Houston that gave me that information, although it gave me plenty. I'll say that it's the school counselor experience that has really provided and equipped me to be able to put together the textbooks that are available for school counselors.
Okay, so with being a school counselor previously and the work that you done with your books, coming from being a school counselor, what do you feel like or you seen was the missing gap that motivated you to say, you know what, there needs to be more education and more that I know I can do that's needed when you wrote your books or even when you decided to become a professor?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a very important question to address in the field because school counselors often don't feel equipped to address mental health issues in schools. So, what we know is that there was a divide, maybe it's still there. Administrators don't really know what school counselors do, or they're better learning because of all the tragedies that are going on in schools. It caused the administrators to raise a brow. But what school counselors don't understand is they are equipped. The difference between becoming a school counselor and becoming a clinical person is just a couple of classes, which means you are equipped in the very same way that your clinical counterpart is equipped. It's just, do you have the courage to use the skills that you've been able to adopt along the way through your experience to help provide services for students? Students have always shown up in schools with mental health issues. Mental health issues, even though it sounds very new, it's not new at all. It's been around a long time. You can think about your old uncle or your grandparents who had concerns and that you really couldn't even explain. And so, school counselors, to me, one of those deficiencies is just knowing that they can intervene and they can mitigate the problems students have from a mental health perspective without being challenged on whether or not they're licensed and whether or not they're equipped, because they have been equipped. We just need to look at the transcript. And then that would be one area, is just making sure counselors feel inspired to do that work, which may lead them to identifying students or children who have mental health concerns.
I'm so glad you talked about the divide, because as a school counselor, even on our teams, you would hear, and I worked in a Title I school, and we were the first line of defense. I mean, the kids trusted you,
Yes.
and where they may not, the families may not trust, people outside may not trust to go to an LPC.
Sure.
And so many times counselors would say, "Oh, but we're only here for to get them back into class, and we're only here to get them back to doing academics."
Right. Or scheduling them.
Or scheduling them, but that's not at all what the kids needed. And I love that you are talking about the divide and trying to change that, because it's 12 hours, right? The difference is 12 hours.
Yes.
And then all the experience, because you said all the experience that you had, it taught you so much about dealing
Right.
with these problems. The school counselor is getting it probably
Right.
more so than in a private practice because of the volume.
It takes Dr. Kathy McDonald to describe to you. She's very tenacious and very committed to saying, you're not going to divide me out from clinical, because I know what comes into my office day in and day out. And I know what issues, problems they are experiencing. And it is so much more than an academic issue, even though administrators were primarily focused on the test, primarily focused on, the academic performance. And so it's always been a larger issue, but school counselors are encouraged to advocate, right, for the way that they're trained, because who can really challenge it when you're the only one or the only
Exactly.
five? Who can tell you that you're not equipped to do a certain thing that you are? And ultimately, you have been empowered and chosen to do what you do for very specific reasons. And while I won't get too spiritual or religious on anyone, I will say that, your calling and your ability to help students in the way that you are super unique and different in that way from anyone else on your campus. So just live in that.
Exactly. That's perfectly said.
Thank you.
And Dr. Wines, we've interviewed multiple school counselors,
Sure.
of course, kind of, with throughout the day. And one of the biggest things that have stood out is that a lot of the staff don't know what they do.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they don't realize what their role is in the school. I have one therapist says, some of the teachers just send the kids to me for disciplinary actions.
Yep.
And it's like, I'm a counselor. Yes, they're having behavioral issues, but this is the wrong view that the kid is having
Sure.
when they're coming to the school counselor office. And so I know a couple of counselors said they had, did a meeting at the beginning of the year with the faculty
Yep.
to educate them, to help them understand what their role is, and
Yes.
educate them on what type of students to send to the office, to their office, but just how to interact with them as well,
Sure.
so they can understand, hey, this is what my role is. Don't put it under this negative light for the kids, because it's already the stigma, right? Of
Right.
seeing a counselor or working with a therapist, and so with the teachers not understanding as well, it's like further putting things behind.
Yes. So what I think with respect to that is there's mental health everywhere you go. You can find it in the slightest of issue. You can find it in not really an issue right now at all. So mental health is everywhere. It's a top-down problem. If the principals and the administration, the district guidance and counseling directors, if they're not inspiring school counselors, then and educating their staff on the role of the school counselor, and these are the types of
Yeah.
things that come out of this office, then people will continue to draw blank, right? Have an amnesic kind of amnesia episode, right? They forget or don't know what the school counselor does. So it's a top-down issue, but school counselors, while we're talking about chaplains coming in and while we're talking about bringing licensed professionals into the schools, all of that can happen, and there's a place for everyone to work, and the problems are pervasive enough
Yeah.
for everyone to be employed. So let's just employ
sure.
everyone
Yeah.
because this is an issue, and it's not just with students. The staff equally have mental health, right, considerations. Leadership
Yeah.
have mental health considerations, but again, these are comprehensive conversations that need to kind of be discussed. But it's a top-down issue. This is what school counselors do. This is what the state, through the Texas model, says school counselors do. This is what the evaluation for school counselors, this is what it stipulates that they do, and making sure all that works together,
For sure.
right, for
Yeah.
their roles, yeah.
So with you, mentioning how it's, from the top down, we have to address this. So with both of you as previous school counselors and working in the schools,
Sure.
how would you guys go about it, or maybe advise that leadership maybe, put something in place to be able to make sure that's understood outside of just saying, hey, this is the school counselor role? Like, do you guys have any ideas on maybe what could be effective in getting that across to the staff and just making sure that it's understood?
Something that I suggest for administrators of school counselors and really in everyone else is when you take a position, meet with everyone and then meet with everyone individually. So meet with them as a department and then meet with them individually. Now that takes time. But if you're new, maybe that's something you do on the onset before you start changing things or having a feeling about what needs to happen, because the administrators who left the school or who are hiring for that school set the tone. So they told you what needed to be done. And maybe there's truth and integrity in what's been told. But I think you sit and you talk with and ask, your staff and your faculty, what do you need from me as a leader? And what has been missing? And how can I help fill those gaps? I think that's a great place to start. But when you get leaders in schools who decide that they're the leader and that their voice is, we already know that the principal, right, makes very, very heavy, necessary decisions. But maybe in collaboration, that's what one of my books is about, administrative leaders and school counselors working together, collaborating together for the purpose of optimal mental health. And so You have to have those conversations, although they take time. That's the first thing that I would suggest. And if you're not new and you've been in the school a while, then maybe you still should have the conversations with everyone, because some of your teachers are new. Learning, listen, what was it like for you? What were your successes? What have been the failures? So that you can lead with others in mind, and that you don't lead from a position of, this is my agenda, everyone get on board, because you're not a representation of the school. The school is a representation of the school.
And I would say that the leader doesn't necessarily have to be the leader, right? You can be a leader. The school counselor can be a leader, and in the guidance or the model, it says that we are to advocate for our
Sure.
profession and teach the community, the stakeholders, our principal, everybody, what
Yes.
it is that we do in our job and what we can do ultimately to be a healthier child all the way around, academically,
Yes.
socially, emotionally, all the parts, right?
Yes.
And so I had a wonderful boss, my very first counseling position, and I brought in my little model and I said, here's all the things that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And she's like, okay, well, that means we're going to have to do a little bit of a workaround, because you have the tax, you have this, you have that, all the things that I
Sure.
had to rearrange. But she was wonderful at that. But
And
I think,
receptive.
and receptive. But it also, she didn't know what it was exactly that I was supposed to do. She had never been a counselor, and she was willing to listen and look at the model. And I said, TEA put this out. We're supposed to do this,
Right.
And she was wonderful about it. So I would say too, to new counselors that are hiring, that are going and interviewing, to ask questions about, like, well, so how is the schedule set up so that I can do the things that are suggested that I do, do my guidance, work with groups, see the individuals based on these percentages
Sure.
in this model.
Yes. In my school counselor as practitioner book, both the first edition and the second edition's coming out this June, both of those help counselors and their administrators to know what should be done. And in the book, if counselors feel uncertain about what to do, then that book helps you know, here are the steps, written by counselor educators and school counselors, or counselor educators who have been school counselors even. So that's a helpful resource. But I agree that the leadership can be positive, love counseling, support you as a counselor, and then do what they can to stay within the law. Principals love operating within the confines of the law. So once they learn, right, that the counselor law is there, then that may be helpful for them to be able to justify why we're moving from an old model of school counseling to what's more current.
Yeah. Well, both of you ladies provided great answers, and it ultimately comes down to education, and
Yes.
educating, the staff, because of course our focus is the students, helping the students, helping our clients, but we have to start at the top and
Yes.
work with the administrators to make sure that they're educated and they understand, so then everything can just kind of flow naturally to be able to
Sure.
offer those services that are needed. So, as we talk about, the services that we provide in schools, and Penny kind of mentioned with her principal being receptive and going in as a new therapist, a new school counselor, and advocating for yourself. For you, Dr. Wines, what advice would you give to a new or aspiring school counselor who's entering the field with a focus on mental health?
Yes. There's several recommendations I might have, so
Okay.
I'll try to be efficient in how I answer this. The first thing is tending to your own mental health is a real thing. You can't provide and support that which you don't have. So
Yeah.
it's important that you know who you are as a practitioner or a provider, and what challenges you hold, and get those remedied and not be afraid to journey on that. If you're home and you're in a toxic relationship, and it's taking quite a bit out of you, and you find yourself not being able to focus, and then there's brain fog, and there's all these emotions that run high, and you think you're going to go to the job and be effective, you're just not. And that's the truth.
Yeah.
So you need to have an awareness of your own mental health. That's all counselors, but definitely those who are coming in to the field, because it's not a misnomer that listening to all of the things around you from everybody, depending on your personality and your ability to cope, can be heavy,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so that depends on you, maybe how you're raised and some other things, but at the end of the day, you need to have a concentration on where are you in light of all of this. I've had counselors that I've been the lead counselor with who they like to save children, or they're advocates for, let's say, African American children, but they never really understood where that was coming from, or why that was their platform, or why they needed to convince other colleagues that that was their claim to fame. So I think knowing you better than anyone else would know you is one recommendation that I would have.
Okay.
The other suggestion is to stay sharp. Don't get in the field and allow yourself to lay dormant. Come out, learn new things. You've gotten your master's degree. Great. That is an accomplishment. That's not where you should stop. You continue to professionally develop and train yourself.
Right.
And I would even say that if there's websites, put your credentials, shout out loud who you are and what your specializations are, so that you begin to develop a reputation for intercession with particular areas.
Okay.
Maybe it's trauma, maybe it's something else, but begin to develop everyone else's palette for you, because you're equipped in these specific ways, and you're trained in these so shout out loud what your credentials are, and don't let anyone minimize that part of all the hard work you've done in your master's and post your master's.
Okay.
Another recommendation that I have, because schools are so culturally based with how they operate. I remember being a part of Sci-Fair, my Sci-Fair colleagues and all of that, but it was, is this the Sci-Fair way? Well, that was the culture that I was a part of, but there's parts of maybe what should be happening, that's not. So sometimes the culture of where you work is thick. So I won't say it's toxic or wrong or right, it's just thick. And for you coming in, trying to change something, motivate or inspire someone to do, that's hard to do. So learn the culture that you're working within, so that better assists you to be more effective.
That wonderful boss that I was telling you about.
Yes.
That wonderful boss. She'd been at my school 2 years, and she said, "We're going to change the culture here. We got to do it very slow.
Got to do it slow.
And you gotta slow your roll." Like she would tell me, you can't come out. Your ideation is popping out all over the place.
Yes.
And you're going to scare them away. So you're going to have to slow it. You're going to have to slow it down. And all the programs that you want to do, like I had all these programs that it was a Title I school. It really needed all these
The
programs.
support, yeah.
And I had the energy, but she says it doesn't matter. They don't.
They don't. Yeah.
They don't, and you want them to come with you, and so we have to bring them slow. And she knew the culture, and she knew how we had to move it and be different, and the culture in the community too.
Yes.
The culture in the community, we were new to the community, and that we had to build the trust with the community.
With the community.
With the parents. And
Yes.
you're right. Exactly. That's perfect.
Thank you. And so that workplace culture is really a thing.
Yeah.
Um, what I'm not telling you to do is to become a part of it. If you came in inspired with ideas and innovation and creativity, that that is a phase of your life that you've entered into with reason, right? Not everyone's creative or innovative. That's not everyone. So if you're in that space and it's been placed on your heart for transformation and change, then don't allow the culture to suck you in. As you were saying, slow grow it, but keep your practice intentional. Yeah.
And I imagine that goes along with when you say keep your practice intentional, that genuineness of yourself, and almost probably not losing yourself within that culture.
Yes.
That can easily happen.
That's in the culture, that's in your marriage, that's even when there's concepts about oneness, oneness doesn't necessarily mean you don't have voice or thought or that you can't complain, right? So you have to maintain what you got in the field for.
Yeah.
Some of those early like motivations to be a counselor or to become a therapist. There's motivations there, and then you get in the system and then they just fall off.
Yeah.
And then you don't know what happened,
Right.
right? So
You can't forget that fire that got you going.
that got you going in the first place. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well, I definitely appreciate that additional insight that you provided, and just kind of guiding new counselors in how they can
Sure.
find themselves getting in the field and not getting lost, and being aware and staying sharp, as you mentioned, because all of those, the three things that you mentioned. I know you said you had several, and we gotta have people make sure they go out there and get your book to understand more
Sure.
and read into this additionally to understand how easily this can happen. Because even when you mentioned the awareness component of it, I know a lot of the programs, and I don't think all of them, before you finish your master's program for your LPC, they require you to do therapy before you graduate. But I've come to find out all schools don't require that.
they don't. And a part of my administrative leader and school counseling book does have a call on counselors to be reflective enough when you're becoming a school counselor and you're doing responding to assignments or coursework that's asking you questions about everyone around you but you. I'd invite you to turn the lens inward and see how you feel personally about
Okay.
that particular question, and that may help out as well.
For sure. Okay. Well, Dr. Wines, we really appreciate your time today.
Sure.
Sitting down with us. I felt like we've had a great conversation, and it's been a pleasure to meet you. And again, I know you've mentioned your books. Can you tell our listeners where they can find your books or how they can find out
Yes.
more about you?
Thank you. If you query www.landa, that's LANDA, pro services with an S.com, there you will find all of the books, a lot of articles that I've published dealing with multicultural school counselor leadership and the like. You'll also be able to sign up for courses
Okay.
coming soon, March of 2024, if you're interested in that.
Okay.
If you're interested in supervision, you can find the application link there. Or if you just happen to be in the area and you're a school counselor and you think you want to attain some private practice experience, you can also contact me there. But the website will be the absolute best place
Okay.
for the books and the table of contents, downloads, and things of that nature.
Okay. And could you remind us of what area you're in again?
The Woodlands.
Okay.
The Woodlands, Texas, just above, headed toward Dallas, just above Houston,
Got it.
I-45 North.
Okay. All right. Well, and before we close here, if you had one thing to leave with our listeners, what would that be?
Remember that your work is not for man. It's for something higher than that. So when you're frustrated with leadership, when you're frustrated with colleagues, or when anything becomes a lot, just remember that we're called into a purpose and that you're serving that and not necessarily those who are in power over you.
Wow, I love that. I love that. Thank you, Dr. Wines.
Very much
Well,
so.
that's all for us today. Thanks for tuning in and taking out time out of your day to listen in on mental health. And remember, sometimes all it takes is resetting your outlook. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ready, Set, Reset 1. Follow us on Instagram at ready_set_reset1 for mental health tips, laughs, and motivation. And if you know a student or have a child in the Fort Worth area that could use some additional support, visit our website at sunflowersigma.com to see if Reset IOP is right for them. You will find the resources discussed in today's podcast in the description area.